Hi class, hope everybody's doing well. Today, what we're going to be talking about in this lecture video is the theme of escape and fantasy. So what I've done is I've actually broken this down into two lecture videos that deal with the same theme. So the first area that we're going to be focusing on is an artistic movement which is called Dada. So this is both artistic and a literary movement. And the whole reason that this movement is going to originate has to do with what's happening in the world at the time. So what we're talking about is World War I. World War I is going to last from 1914 to 1918, and a lot of psychological trauma is happening at this time. So, as a means of escaping some of the realities of the world and war at this point, there are going to be a group of artists that are going to begin this group called Dada that are going to try and get away from some of that reality of life that is in that moment. So the Dada movement itself is going to last from 1916 to 1919. This is going to be developed during World War I in Switzerland, and the reason it happens in Switzerland is because it's one of the only countries at that time, the only safe places in Europe. So when we talk about Dada, we can't necessarily talk about it or describe it as sharing formal aspects, but it does have a very similar idea component that we can put into most of the works that are being made at this time. So this concept of anti-art, the idea of kind of questioning the definition of art and redefining the definition of art are two components that we're going to see here. So the Cabaret Voltaire is a very rundown bar in which poems, songs, and stories are going to be recited and performed. The absence of the artistic program and rules kind of rebelling against the bourgeois at the time. So I wanted to give you a little quote here just to kind of get you a feel of the time period and the mindset. So on our next slide here, it says, revolted by the butchery of the 1914 World War, we in Zurich devoted ourselves to the arts. While the guns rambled in the distance, we sang, painted, made collages, and wrote poems with all our might. We were seeking an art based on fundamentals to cure the madness of the age, and a new order of things that would restore the balance between heaven and hell. So this quote kind of gives you a little bit of a feel for the mindset of people at the time. There's a lot of chaos that's happening, a lot of destruction that's happening in World War I, and people need a way to escape from that chaos. So think about it this way. If you have, everyone kind of deals with things in different ways. There are some people who will deal with, a bad day at work or some trauma that's going on in their life. Maybe they'll go to the gym and they'll work out. Or other people like to go for a run. Some people will go to a bar and have a drink. Some people go shopping, which really just makes more problems because then you get the bills from the shopping. I myself, I'm a cleaner. I like to clean like crazy. So if I'm going through anything in my personal life that's very stressful, I tend to clean. That's my coping mechanism. So these artists at the time, their escape from dealing with reality is in making art. So to talk about where we get this name Dada, the idea here is there's a couple different origins for the name. So the first is the French-German dictionary. This was open to the word Dada, which literally means child's wooden horse, but it was found by chance. They just skimmed through the dictionary and then put their finger on a word without looking, and then this is the word that came up. Another idea into where the origins of the name kind of came from is that Dada is a very common children's first word. So the idea of kind of regression to early childhood, an artist kind of wishing to start life over. When you're younger, you don't have to deal with all of the, like paying bills and things like that. You can just kind of be able to be a little bit more free and a little bit more innocent. The third one is that in Russian, dada literally means yes, yes. So we are going to see that theme kind of being present, where whatever's happening, we're just going to kind of embrace it and then kind of move forward. So altogether, very playful, very experimental. We want creativeness, hopefulness that's coming through it. And this is all coming out of the traumas that are happening in World War I at the time. So the first artist that we're going to look at that is going to embrace this movement is an artist that we saw earlier. His name is Marcel Duchamp. He was born 1887, died 1968. He believed that art was a habit-forming drug. So in creating Dada art, Duchamp is going to use wordplay and punning in addition to visual images. So the title of this is Look, and you can see L-H-O-O-Q is how look is actually spelled. Made by Duchamp in 1919. Medium is a reproduction of the Mona Lisa, but it has been altered by pencil. So the title itself is kind of a bilingual pun. Phonetically, we can say look, which is the artist's way of kind of commanding the viewer to look at what he's presenting to us. In French, if you pronounce out each one of those letters as how they sound, it actually says the word she's got a hot ass. We can also take look, and if you make that backwards, then it becomes cool. So it's kind of cool to have this new form of art, this new way of thinking. So these are all bilingual puns, and the idea of punning is something that's going to be a component of the Dada movement. When we talk about the way in which the artist creates this is what's called a ready-made aided. So he's taking an artwork that's already existing, the Mona Lisa by Leonardo da Vinci. He makes a reproduction of that, a copy of it, and then we're altering it slightly by adding on the beard and the mustache here. So it's a ready-made, an artwork that's already there, and then we're adding to that. So the debate here that kind of goes along with this artwork is, are we actually creating something new, or are we destroying something that was already made? So the response that the artist is going to give to that comment is, you have to break eggs to make an omelet. When we talk about the overall meaning of this piece, we're taking a classical icon, but we are kind of playing with some gender role ideas here. And so there is a little bit more kind of background in that, where we're kind of playing with the concepts of sexual ambiguity, of Mona Lisa, maybe of Leonardo da Vinci, of Marcel Duchamp, but there is a little bit of, it's a little bit enigmatic in exactly what the artist is trying to convey here. Another work that we're going to see by Marcel Duchamp is titled Fountain. This is made in 1917. So to give you a little context here, this was actually submitted to be exhibited in a show which was called the Society of Independent Artists. Now in this show, this is at a time in which we have already dealt with the Impressionist movement, the Realists, where artists were submitting works to the Salon and they were being rejected. So we have these other exhibits in which we want to be able to showcase any work of art. It doesn't have to follow the rules and the conventions of the Royal Academy. So this particular exhibit, the Society of Independent Artists, the foundation of this is that they were supposed to accept every single work of art, like no ifs, ands, or buts about it. This is the only work that was submitted and was rejected. So that gives you kind of a little bit of an idea of just how controversial and how impactful this piece was at that time. So what we're seeing here, it's a ready-made. So all it is a urinal. What Marcel Duchamp did is he went to L.J. Mott's Ironworks. It's a Mott's plumbing supply shop, and purchased this urinal. So he turns it on its side, he signs it R. Mott, and then he puts the date on there, 1917, and he gives it a new title. Instead of calling it a urinal, he's calling it a fountain. So what happens here is we have a lot of people that are going to see resistance to this and start, kind of asking questions like, well, how can you say that that's possibly art? One, you didn't actually make it yourself. All you did was you bought something and then turned it on its side and signed it. So does it have to have craft? Does it have to be made by that person in order for it to be art? Does it have to be aesthetically pleasing? Is this nice to look at? I mean, we're looking at a urinal here. So is that something that's nice to look at? So there's a lot of questions about what is art and what's necessary. We're really pushing the boundaries of the definition of art with this particular piece. If we look at it formally from the argument of the artist, we can talk about the curves, the shiny porcelain, we can connect the idea of a fountain and a urinating man. There are many things that we can kind of connect with this piece, but again, the biggest thing here is that what we're doing is we're kind of questioning that definition. We're trying to break boundaries of what is art and what is not art. And a lot of the appeal for the artists at this time is the fact that they are getting resistance in the works that they're making. So another piece that we see by Marcel Duchamp is what's called To Be Looked At from the Other Side of the Glass with One Eye Close To for Almost an Hour. So kind of a lengthy title that we're getting there, made in 1918. Medium is going to be oil paint, silver leaf, lead wire, and magnifying lens on glass. So the subject here, the way the composition is set up, we've got that pyramid at the top. We are seeing balance that's being demonstrated on the bottom there with this tilted weight, the larger circle on the bottom right-hand side. So just like the title of Look, what the title is doing here is it's instructing the viewer. So it's creating this relationship between the viewer and the work of art. This is two-sided, it's glass, so you can go on the other side and see the exact opposite, the mirror image of that. So a little bit of a cubist influence there where we're getting multiple viewpoints. Now the biggest thing about this piece, we see on the, especially at the bottom right-hand side, all of the glass is actually broken. So what happens is in shipment from one gallery to another, this piece is going to get damaged. So the next gallery director that's going to open up the piece to put it on display, he informs Marcel Duchamp that, hey, I'm really sorry, but your artwork got damaged, the glass is broken, we can't put it on display. Marcel Duchamp's response back to that is, if the glass broke, then that is the way that it was meant to be. So we're putting this concept of chance in that we are trying to, that, you know, like everything happens for a reason, that type of mindset where things that may not quite make sense or may not be your plan, but they happen and they need to happen in that way. So that's kind of the overall biggest component that we're getting from this work of art by Marcel Duchamp. The next artist that we're looking at is also going to focus on that concept of chance. So this is going to be Hans Arp. He was born 1887, dies 1966. He's going to be one of the founders of the European Dada, and he's going to focus on the idea of playfulness. So chance will be a component in that playfulness. He wanted to be liberated from the rational thought, was his mindset. So this particular piece here is called Collage Arranged According to the Laws of Chance. It was made between 1916 and 1917. Medium is just simply torn pieces of paper and then they're pasted on another sheet of paper. But the technique that he's using in order to be able to make it. So what we're doing is we're taking these pieces of paper, we're tearing up little squares of that paper, and then from a few feet above the ground, he's going to drop the squares. Wherever they land on that piece of paper underneath, he says is where they're meant to be. So we are taking that idea of chance in which, yes, he is the one that's dropping the squares, but he's not necessarily setting up the composition. He's letting them fall and letting the artwork kind of create itself. So the edges themselves of the piece of paper that he's tearing, because he's not necessarily cutting them, he's just tearing it, are going to be kind of ragged. The squares are uneven, and this is giving the impression that the shapes are kind of trying to arrange themselves, very energized, a lot of movement that we're seeing in this. The next piece by the same artist, Hans Art, is called The Dancer, and this was made in 1928. So medium here is going to be a chord collage. The technique that the artist is using is he's placing a string on a flat surface and then moving the string in order to be able to shape this kind of intended figure. So he's almost like playing with the work of art until he gets the figure that he wants. So the subject itself is supposed to be a humorous image of a dancer. Very large torso, we have that circle in the center, and then you get the really, really tiny head at the top. The way the composition is set up, so we have this strong diagonal, which is giving us this idea of forward motion, so it enhances the concept of a dancer. And then this, we also get like the kicking up of the leg, the flowing hair, all of which are creating a feeling of movement through space. So emphasizes the expression of unconscious material through play, through chance, and rapid execution. The whole idea here is that we want to have that component of the unconscious mind. So things like chance, things like the unconscious mind, things like the trying to, escape reality. This is all part of this entire Dada movement that we're seeing. Now, the last work of art that we're going to see for part 1 of Escape and Fantasy is a piece by Man Ray, and this was made between 1890 and 1976. So Man Ray is an American Dadaist who kind of played, quote unquote, with words, images, and objects, oftentimes using ready-mades throughout his work. So this piece actually has 2 different names. We have a little backstory on that. So the first time it was called Indestructible Object. Or I'm sorry, that was the second time it was called Indestructible Object. The very first time it was called Object to be Destroyed. This was made by Man Ray. The first time he made it was 1923. The second time he makes it is 1964. So what happens is the original sculpture, the one that was titled Object to be Destroyed, this was put in a gallery. A student had read the title of it and took it quite literally that they needed to destroy the object. So they actually went and got a hammer and they started smashing up the work of art. Now the next time that he remakes this sculpture, he is going to title it Indestructible Object. So we are seeing that kind of like back and forth of engaging the viewer and what we're trying to get the viewer to be able to kind of embrace and understand. So the medium here, we have found objects as a ready-made aided. What we're taking is a metronome, and then all we're doing is adding a photograph of an eye to the pendulum of the metronome. So this transforms a purely functional object into more of a work of art. So as a viewer, we're watching the moving piece, now it's actually watching you. So you're getting this back and forth relationship. Looking and being looked at, actual and implied motion, utility, and aesthetics, these are all concepts that are kind of coming through. So the title itself kind of suggests this fine line between separating creation and destruction. So as far as our Dada movement goes, some of our big things that we want to kind of take away from this is going to be the fact that we are trying to escape some of the tragedies and the reality of life at this time, specifically World War I. And in a way to be able to do that, we need to have this kind of outlet. There are many people that are doing all sorts of different things, but these people that we just looked at are focusing on art in order to be able to do that. Big part of it is going to be the regression to childhood, because the mindset as a child is that you don't necessarily have to deal with the traumas and the tribulations of everyday life as an adult. So we are going to have that childhood component. We are also going to focus on the idea of chance and everything kind of happening for a reason. So Dada is a very short-lived movement. It happens just really during World War I. But the importance of the Dada movement is that this is going to lay the foundation for our next movement that we're going to be looking at, which is called Surrealism. And Surrealism, all it is really just expanding on some of the concepts that we looked at within Dada. So that's the end of part 1 for Escape and Fantasy.